Let me welcome my first guest. He is attorney Justin Phelps. You know him. He's been with us before. We have been fortunate to have him. Here's with us. He is one of those people who, will not hold back on his position. He's not known to hold his tongue when he sees a contradiction or political missteps. Justin Phelps, good morning to you. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you. Good morning.
I thank you so much for joining me. Listeners would know that you're one of the region's outstanding commercial litigators with a specialization in advocacy, a certified mediator qualified to practice throughout the Commonwealth Caribbean. I am always amused and encouraged that we share one pet peeve in common. And I remember back in 2004 when you were asked the question, what is your pet peeve? I remember the quote being, my pet peeve is insincerity, posturing, pretense, shamelessness, and corrupt millionaires who rush to the front of the church.
It's the same way today, isn't it?
And I have chuckled at that for a long time. In the public arena, the pictures of youngsters alleged to be the Attorney General's Faris Al-Rawari's children with high-powered weapons at Camp Komuto. Yesterday's Guardian reports that Senior Public Affairs Officer of the Defense Force, Major Al Alexander, said none of the Al-Rawari children took part in the exercise. Rather, he said they were there to observe what is done in emergency situations. He went on to admit, however, that some children displayed a certain level of curiosity and were allowed to interact with the unarmed weapons. There are three separate issues coming out of this. One is who took the pictures. Secondly, who leaked the pictures. And thirdly, should the AG be removed or resign, as is suggested by the member for Oropouche East, Dr. Rudal Moonilal, who is now demanding his removal. We'll get to that. However, let me start you with the first question. Before we get to the MP Moonilal situation, which is the subject of a Facebook post that you put up there that caught my eye immediately. The first question is this... If this was supervised and the weapons were unarmed, is this an issue, first of all, Attorney Phelps?
I think that it is an issue worthy of inquiry, merely because there is a statutory provision that makes it a criminal offense for children to be in possession of firearms, or anyone not authorized to be in possession of firearms. So I think that the level of political discussion in Trinidad would be promoted and advanced if people did not try to avoid matters which were worthy of inquiry.
Good enough.
But that is all that it is. A question that is worthy of inquiry is just that, something that ought to be inquired into. It is a leap of blind faith for Mr. Moonilal, I think, to step from there into the realm of calling for resignation.
I suppose
you'll be getting to that.
I definitely will be getting to Mr. Moonilal in a moment, because, as I said, that was the crux of your Facebook page. But let's deal with the Defense Force. We know they have launched an investigation. Was this bad judgment by the Defense Force who mounted this display, and should someone in the Defense Force be held responsible for going through with this? Because at the end of the day, even if folks agree to something, acquiesce to something, there had to be an initiator. Somebody make a request. Somebody said, okay, here in my judgment, I can go ahead and do this. So should someone in the Defense Force be held responsible for this exercise with the children holding the weapons in this case?
Well, the answer to that is I don't know. And the reason that I don't know, and I suppose with some degree of confidence that no one in the country knows, is because when Mr. Moonilal was playing bombshell politics in Parliament, he never articulated a clear case. What he did is he bandied about photographs of children in Parliament and dropped it as some sort of political bombshell without ever articulating a specific case. Was it that someone in the Defense Force oversaw this wrongfully? Was it that the Attorney General was present and oversaw this wrongfully? He never articulated anything of the sort. Which is a testament to the level of political discourse that we have permitted to be engaged in our Parliament. The primitive level of political discussion in which Pekong and Mauvais Lang have been accepted by the population for many, many decades, and which is now having a deleterious effect on our national issues being advanced.
I'm coming all the way down to that because the behavior, the conduct in the Parliament is something that must be discussed. I think folks confuse what happens in the House of Lords into the craziness that is allowed to happen here. But we will get there in a moment. The PM, that's the Prime Minister, understandably has denounced the leaking of these pictures. And as you said, Monilal did not articulate how the pictures got out there. But the Prime Minister denounced the taking of these pictures and said if the pictures were leaked as a question of national security, we must look into how can the protectors betray the responsibility and the confidence given to them and expose the identity of those in their charges. Anyone can see in the pictures who, you can get a good look as to what the children look like. Do you agree with the PM that if in fact this was leaked, we are looking at a national security issue?
Absolutely. The defense force and the police force in any democratic country have to be completely and utterly insulated from any political influence or allegiance. And the implications are frightening if you find any circumstance in which a member of the police force or defense force has a political allegiance. But the difficulty, I think, is in the root of our politics. And the reason I say that is that the ambition that Trinidad and Tobago has to have now is to break the racial and political deadlock. And the reason that that is significant is because it means that if that is our ambition, when an opposition MP raises an issue, it doesn't help for the political commentators on both sides of the political divide to undermine it with distraction. If we want to persuade if the PNM wants to persuade the UNC base that it ought to come over to the PNM, that race is irrelevant and that our politics is all-inclusive, then we have to deal with matters that are raised in a sincere way. So that is the first thing. Having said that, there's nothing articulated by Mr. Monilal. And having not articulated anything, the questions that we are talking about are really questions that are wholly and entirely moot. Mr. Monilal, if he had a serious and specific charge to make against a high constitutional office holder, would presumably have stood up in Parliament without all of the nonsense and photographs and all of that, and said that I wish to raise in this Parliament a matter of public interest, and it is A, B, and C that I allege against the Attorney General. The Attorney General would then have been in a position to answer some specific charge. There really is no specific charge.
Yes, you said. Yes, indeed. We are talking to Attorney Justin Phelps, my guest here on Brunch this morning. Specialization is in advocacy. He's a commercial litigator and an advocate, I think, by his own admission, would be that. The member for Oropouche East, you said in your Facebook post that caught my attention, is that he is not the messenger who should be calling from the minister's removal. You paraphrased the Bible. He without must remove it from his eye first before anybody else. Detail to our listeners what you were specifically leading to in your Facebook page.
Well, should I tell you what the facts are and then try to elaborate on what I think the consequences are?
Please do.
The facts are that Mr. Monilal was a senior minister in a government that presided over a regime in which the question of resignation was ignored in connection with high matters of public interest. So that you had Mr. Warner survive without anyone suggesting to him that he ought to resign. You had Mr. Anil Roberts, you had the state of emergency, Prakash Ramada, Anand Ramlogan, Section 34. All of these things did not meet the standards of resignation under the Westminster model as far as Mr. Monilal was concerned. And therefore, when the public look at our Parliament and see that individual calling for a resignation, he lacks any authority. He doesn't have the legitimacy to do it. And I believe that the United National Congress would be doing Trinidad and Tobago a favor if it sought to refashion itself and regain some legitimacy by purging the members who presided over Mr. Warner, Mr. Ramadar, Mr. Volney, and Mr. Roberts, and the rest of them. That is important because the country does not want, whether you support the PNM or not, you do not want a PNM government that has no legitimate opposition, because the nation's business cannot be taken forward.
Democracy in general, yes. Democracy is not served at all when you have a single party of integrity or legitimacy. Yes, indeed.
That's right.
Justin Phelps, I like the bigger picture that you always bring forward, because at the end of the day, it is a service for Trinidad and Tobago for folks to remove this this racial divide, this constituency that folks play to when they are matters of national importance. And as such, I like it when you say for the UNC to take the trouble out of their own eyes, the log as it were, and for the PNM to do the same thing if they want to give the impact, send a message to the nation that we are here to represent all of Trinidad and Tobago, and we need to get out of this partisan politics based on race as we do. So it would be instructive if, first of all, when issues are discussed, they are discussed from a national standpoint, and when representation is made in the people's house, I'll get to the parliament now, that we get a chance to hear what is being said instead of this sophomoric chattering, giggling, chuckling, and shouting out where the speaker becomes a central person every minute standing up to ask somebody to observe the House rules.
When you think that the country has problems protecting its most vulnerable children, then it becomes clearly disgraceful, the level of discourse that goes on in our parliament.
Indeed.
When you think that you can have desk thumping when photographs of children are being bandied about, and children's bodies are found in buckets in this country, it's a disgrace.
Yes.
And the fact that the country has tolerated it for so long is a reflection on us. But coming back to consensus building and country building and nation building, which we all pay lip service to, the UNC supporters have to be persuaded by the PNM supporters that we take their concerns seriously.
Indeed.
So what you have to balance is you have to say on this particular issue, okay, we take this matter seriously, but we condemn the production in Parliament of photographs of children, and we also say that Mr. Moonilal doesn't have the legitimacy to be making the calls that he is. But there's a paramount point, and it is the democratic institutions of this country cannot function if there is a fluid threshold for resignation of a minister that is applied according to political expediency. And what that threshold ought to be is one that balances the Westminster Constitutional Convention of ministerial responsibility, so that we hold our ministers responsible. And it must balance as well the fact that you cannot be permitted to neutralize constitutional office in this country merely by making opaque allegations against office holders. And I think that when you balance it that way, which is the constitutional way, the question of the Attorney General resigning simply does not arise. Otherwise, what we will have is a continuation, when they are in opposition, of the United National Congress penchant for neutralizing constitutional institutions. It happened with the Police Complaints Authority, where allegations were made by the United National Congress that the chairperson of the Police Complaints Authority had been compromised. They have compromised and politicized the Integrity Commission, the Office of the President, the Parliament, to the point where the Office of the President, in the person of Timothy Hammersmith at the time, had to write a letter making suggestions about how you ought to communicate democratically produced legislation for proclamation by the Office of the President. So I think that when you look at the matter from top to bottom, what you extract from this scenario is several things. First, the question of the Attorney General's resignation is nonsense. There is no basis for it. Second, the UNC has some work to do if it wants to make a contribution to the future of Trinidad and Tobago, and the work it has to do is to purge itself of the persons who presided over the last regime, who were voted out because of the way they presided over the last regime. Third, the PNM, the level of political discussion must attract the PNM base to taking legitimate concerns raised seriously. Otherwise, you will continue in the political and racially divided deadlock. And fourth, and which I think is most important, it cannot be that our moral values, our value systems, whether we are UNC or PNM, permit us to sit silently by when a parliamentarian takes photographs of children and bandies it about, leaks it on social media, and it is repeated in the mainstream media. We cannot say in 2016 that is who we are. If Mr. Munilal had a serious allegation to make, this is the way I break it down in my own mind, to deal with the reality. If he had a serious allegation to make against the Attorney General in connection with these photographs, those photographs never had to be produced. They had to be sent to the relevant authorities under cover of a letter.
Yes.
And we would never have seen these children.
So
our value system must prompt us to call this a disgrace. And if the parliamentary system at the moment doesn't have a way to censure that, it better find one quick.
The political gallery to neutralize, as you said, the legitimacy of office holders must be discontinued. I am asking you to reconcile one part. I concur wholeheartedly with what you have said. There is one area here I am going to ask you to reconcile. You said, while you said Mr. Munilal came with nothing except, the political gallerying, at some point you did pass the brush to I interpreted to mean that you passed the brush to the Attorney General, because you said it is sometimes more politically expedient to admit a minor error than to engage in something that demeans the intelligence of the public. Explain, please.
Well, what I was referring to there is the statement by the Attorney General that he was not present. Now, once we accept that, and no one has denied it, and Mr. Munilal hasn't advanced anything different, then all it means is that someone in the defense force made an error of judgment and did something that he ought not to have done.
Gotcha.
And it is better for the country to say, look, there was a slip of judgment on the part of a member of the defense force here. And this would have been a non-issue after that.
I thank you so much for clarifying that, because I wondered if, in fact, you were admonishing the Attorney General for not dealing with it in such a way, but you're saying, in fact,
no,
the error was...
I think that the Attorney General has become embroiled in a news cycle unjustifiably. If what the Attorney General said is true, and Mr. Munilal never said the opposite, that he wasn't even present when the incident depicted in the photographs transpired, then that's the end of the matter as far as the Attorney General is concerned.
And that is exactly what he said from London. According to the account given by the Defence Force, the Attorney General and Minister Stuart Young were in another part of the camp when all of this was going down. So I'm clear.
That's right.
I do need you, Attorney Justin Phelps, is my guest this morning. We've got him for another 5 minutes. I've got to utilize that because I think you don't, as my mother would say, put water in your mouth to get to the point. What is necessary, Attorney Phelps, to get some level of decorum in the Parliament so that what you think can be done here? Because as I said earlier, every minute,
different people
vote for different people.
Because we seem to be repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again, and there are no standards. There are no standards that are generally applied by, which raises the possibility of a deeper question that we have either an identity crisis in Trinidad and Tobago, or we have an identity that we ought to question. At the end of the day, it is the people who elect our members of Parliament, and if we are electing people who behave that way, I mean, Dr. Munilal is not the first time. We had Vernella Aline Toppin give a disgraceful exhibition of the human condition in Parliament televised to the country.
Unquestionably.
If that wasn't a wake-up call for us, and apparently it wasn't, because Mr. Moonilal has come many, many months after to do something similar, then it means that we need to look at ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
The political parties as well need to offer us candidates that we can feel some degree of assurance will conduct themselves properly.
That is what I was hoping.
Underneath all of that, no one wants to impose their value judgments and concepts of what is decent and what is not on anyone else. Beneath all of that, and more fundamentally, if you were going to conduct yourself indecently, as long as you're not scandalizing children and old people and that sort of thing, indecently, but deal with the nation's business, so that I know that there's something that will prevent another Kiana Cumberbatch, something that is going to stop corruption, which I think, although we are numb to hearing the word, I don't think that we understand what it means. Kofi Annan, when he wrote the foreword to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, drew a very clear line between corruption and the security of the people in the country in which the corruption occurred.
Intertwined.
And Trinidad, yes, and Trinidad and Tobago needs to understand that every dollar stolen is resulting directly in the crime situation. The children in the buckets, the molested children, the single mothers who can't afford daycare, who have to leave their children in the hands of persons who subsequently videotape them in sexual situations and that type of thing. Until you realize that, we get nowhere. When you realize it, there will be marches in front of Parliament as long as they continue to exchange pecan and mobilang while our children and old people continue to die.
Justin Phelps, my guest, 1024 leads me straight into the area, having put to rest the area of the children and the army and the guns. We will see what comes out of the investigation that has been instituted by the army. Brings us into the FATCA. As against perception by most people that this has been resolved and we'll worry about it later on. Before another deadline showdown comes to us, how optimistic are you that the opposition will join with the governing party, the PNM, in bringing a situation that is agreed to by the Trinidad and Tobago Parliament to participate in this FATCA legislation, which is to say, not the grace period given to us, but in fact the fact that we are signing on with that special majority that is required?
I am reasonably confident because at the end of the day, I believe that there are parliamentarians on the opposition side that understand the implications for the country. And I think that at the end of the day, sometimes perhaps I paint a pessimistic picture, but at the end of the day, the people who vote for the United National Congress have the country's interest at heart, and the fact that those members of parliament are accountable to good people, I think, will prevail.
The opposition leader said that she said that my concern is for the security of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Their privacy is what she specifically alluded to. Do you see any credence in that argument?
Absolutely none. I think that the privacy provisions in the legislation are sufficiently well drafted to protect people's privacy. Just as we have a banking system here, which in certain exceptional circumstances could be infiltrated to obtain information touching and concerning crime. But you see, again, it ties back into the question that we were discussing moments ago in a different context. Trinidadians and Tobagonians must make no bones about it. The financial affairs and the children of the members of Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago are well in order. Invariably, the members of Parliament on both sides of the House have their finances, their children, their house, their land, and their next meal well in order. And if that doesn't start to engage the attention of the population fast, then we have nowhere to go. If it does start to engage the attention of the population, then we will hold them to a certain standard.
I think there are folks who are beginning to read into this is that the reciprocal arrangement of Trinidad and Tobago providing the United States with information about their nationals who have holdings or interests here, the reciprocity involved in that is what many folks are opining is the concern from the other side of the divide.
Well, there is a basis for that, in fact. And the basis for that, in fact, is that the last regime had an Auditor General's report that impeached the accounting in nearly every single ministry. And therefore it is not far-fetched for an objective Trinbagonian to say, well, hang on a second, if the accounting was so poor, the level of corruption is, an accountant would tell you, that where the Auditor General is raising queries about accounting, it is because the controls in the institution were poor, and that is the number one indicia of corruption. So it is not far-fetched in my mind for an objective Trinidadian to say, you know what is really concerning the opposition members is that something might be revealed that they don't wish to have revealed.
Walla walla bing bang, indeed.
There you go.
Attorney Justin Phelps, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your perspective. Truly appreciated. And it was very interesting Facebook post, as you have many of them there. And I thank you for using the social media platform to carry the message through. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on Brunch this morning.
It was a pleasure. Thanks.
I thank you, sir. It's 29 minutes now after 10 o'clock here inside Brunch, 107.7. I'll be going to Rico Dupre, the program director of Radio Soleil in New York. That is the voice of the Haitian people everywhere in the world outside of Haiti. Going to be talking to him about the situation on the ground, where it is, and the crop devastation that could affect the nation for a longer time, coupled with the question of cholera. All of that and more as we continue.